Greta Thunberg believed she had found her perfect target. Jason Momoa, the Hollywood superstar, the Aquaman on screen, but allegedly politically naive, uneducated, and comfortable. For weeks, Thunberg had been firing shots at him in interviews. She called him a millionaire detached from reality, who flies private jets while the world burns. When Momoa finally agreed to come on her live show, she was sure that tonight she would dismantle him in front of millions. But what happened in the next 30 minutes left Thunberg speechless and shattered her image as the untouchable moral voice of a generation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Starkind Stories. Don't forget to mention which country you're watching from in the comments. Let's get started. In the glaring studio lights, two worlds collided. The climate activist moralist and the quiet, disciplined strategist from Hollywood. What began as a normal interview turned into the showdown of the year. Greta sat confidently in her signature chair in her blue sweater, notes on her lap. Her editorial team had spent months collecting clips and quotes, statements from Momoa, Instagram posts, old advertising contracts, flight data. They wanted to surprise him with facts and accusations. In the next room, there was even an emergency dossier in case Momoa put up a good fight. What she didn't know was that across town, Momoa's small but clever team had also meticulously prepared, just like for a movie premiere. No agents, no PR managers, but lawyers, data analysts, and former journalists. While Thunberg's team formulated lines of attack, Momoa planned a counterattack with facts, composure, and ice-cold precision. In Studio B, Momoa checked his microphone one last time. Calm, almost meditative, he wore a simple dark blue suit. No flashy statements, no populism. But under his elegant exterior were three carefully prepared folders. The first, Thunberg's inconsistent statements on personal carbon footprints. The second, analyses of real climate policy versus activism. The third, hopefully unnecessary, contained information that could end careers. The room was charged. Everyone in the studio felt it. This was not a normal conversation. It was a duel, and both knew only one would emerge unscathed. The preparation had been meticulous. Jason Momoa had not treated the conversation like an interview, but like a major Hollywood premiere with a political dimension. His team, small but experienced, had compiled a collection of dossiers that would have made even the strategists of a presidential campaign look pale. Videos, quotes, flight statistics, sponsoring deals, all neatly archived. But that alone was not his greatest strength. What Momoa brought could not be trained. Credibility. He knew what it meant to fight your way through a system that is not always kind to you. Not to talk about others, but to have experienced for himself what it means to earn respect, on and off set. He had often felt the arrogance of outsiders, and tonight it would be thrown back at him. For Greta Thunberg, a lot was at stake. Her reputation as the moral authority of the young climate movement, as the voice of a more just future, rested on her talent for cornering opponents rhetorically. For Momoa, it was an opportunity to show that people like him, quiet, disciplined, fact-based, would no longer be excluded from ideologically charged debates. The tension was palpable. Both sides had been eyeing each other for months, exchanging comments, provoking each other. But the real break came 2 weeks earlier, when Thunberg used an entire podcast to caricature Momoa as a luxury-loving professional without values, as an actor who only speaks when it's safe. Her team had edited interview snippets to make him sound simple-minded. And that was exactly what was about to take its revenge tonight. Because since then, Momoa had not only prepared answers, but a strategy based not on defense, but on a pivot. He had worked his way through Thunberg's own statements, her contradictions, her moral blind spots. But neither of them suspected that evening that it wouldn't just be about climate or acting. It was about much more, a battle between moral arrogance and quiet integrity, between those who control narratives and those who rewrite them. If you've watched this far, you're already part of this journey. Subscribe and follow along. With 30 seconds left until broadcast, both took a deep breath. The camera's red light glowed. Thunberg began with the self-assurance of a woman accustomed to thousands of microphones. Good evening, I'm Greta Thunberg, and this is The Next Generation. Tonight, we have Hollywood professional Jason Momoa, someone who has recently commented on topics he, frankly, understands little about. The tone was set, passive-aggressive, condescending, and designed to provoke. On the split screen, Momoa appeared, calm, focused, almost emotionless. He had studied every episode, every conversation with Greta, her favorite interruptions, her moral tactics, her weaknesses when the tables were turned. "Mr. Momoa," she began while sorting her papers, "you're an actor, not a climate expert, and yet you publicly talk about sustainability, politics, and society. What exactly qualifies you to tell the world how it should behave?" A typical Thunberg opening, direct, sharp, intended as a moral test. But Momoa did not fall for the trap. No attempt to justify. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and said calmly, "Ms. Thunberg, that's not the right question. The right question is, why do people who never had to fight for recognition, never had to confront arrogance or ignorance, believe they have the sole right to decide the validity of voices?" Silence. Ice-cold silence. He had not only parried, he had turned the direction, straight to her vulnerability, her moral privilege. Greta blinked, surprised and uncharacteristically nervous. "Oh," she replied, her voice now sharper. "So you're saying experience doesn't count? That success disqualifies you? To me, that sounds like reverse discrimination." Momoa shook his head slightly. He had anticipated this exact pivot. "On the contrary, experience counts. That's why I'm speaking. Because I know what it means to fail, to fight your way back up. Because I have experienced how complex our society is. And because I believe that interviews meant only to shame and blame don't help, they divide." The studio air grew heavier. Thunberg's editorial team in the control room saw their host in retreat for the first time. Momoa, the allegedly naive actor, dominated with composure and depth. Thunberg tried to change the subject. "Let's talk about your sponsorship deals. Sustainability begins with the decisions you make, and yours look more like greenwashing." A joker, she thought. But Momoa was prepared. Thunberg had thought she would score with her favorite weapon, simplifying complex issues into provocative accusations. It had worked with dozens of politicians. Why not with an actor? "Mr. Momoa," she began with cold precision, "you support gigantic sponsorship deals, you travel all over the world, you preach sustainability, and yet you contribute to CO2 emissions, consumerism, and social inequality. How do you explain that to the families who have to turn over every penny?" In the past, this tactic would have been enough, but Momoa was not only prepared, he was deliberately calm. He smiled briefly. Then came the counter. Precise, legalistic, irrefutable. "Greta, let's clearly name what we're talking about. Are you referring to the projects with which we are building soccer fields for disadvantaged children together with UNICEF? Or are you referring to the reforestation campaigns in Brazil that we helped organize? Or are you talking about my decision not to accept certain lucrative contracts because they were not consistent with my values?" She tried to interrupt, in vain. His voice grew firmer. "If you talk about responsibility, we should also talk about greenwashing in NGO funding, about first-class flights to climate summits, and about how easy it is to make demands when you yourself have never had to take responsibility for real decisions." The studio got hot. The guests, journalists, climate activists, technicians began to look around restlessly. What was happening here? Thunberg tried a topic change. "Let's talk about safety. In your industry, scandals, violence, doping, and abuse allegations are piling up. And yet you don't speak publicly about these problems. Why not?" Here too, Momoa was prepared. He took out his phone, typed briefly, and held it up. "Since 2020, I have been working with organizations that are committed to prevention in youth sports. I talk to those affected there, not on a stage, but behind closed doors, without cameras." Then he put his phone down, his eyes fixed on her. "The difference between us, Greta, for you, topics are headlines. For me, they are people." The camera captured Thunberg's face, petrified, pale, her gaze flickering, the moment that millions of viewers would watch in slow motion. But Momoa was not finished yet. He leaned slightly forward, his voice deeper, firmer. "You know why you really invited me here, Greta? Not for a discussion, but because it bothers you that someone like me quiet, not academic, but consistent, dares to speak up for justice. And not with slogans, but with actions. The control room panicked. A producer waved wildly, "Insert commercial break." But Greta didn't react. She was paralyzed. Her hand trembled slightly. When she reached for the water glass, Momoa noticed it and knew the final blow was coming now. "You questioned my qualifications, so let's talk about yours. Do we really want to talk about your partly radical statements, which cause head shaking even within your own movement? About your moral selectivity? About the damage that polarization causes, even when it comes from the green side?" She opened her mouth. He raised his hand. "No, I'm not finished yet." His voice now sounded like a lawyer in court. "You built your career on pitting people against each other, selling fear, shifting blame, and now you have the nerve to tell me I'm not qualified to take responsibility." Greta Thunberg's face turned red. Her lips pressed together. Her fingers clutched the pen. She was usually the one who dominated. Now she was the target, and Jason Momoa stood like a general who had just silenced an entire army. Slowly, Jason Momoa reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a simple black folder, prepared exactly for this moment. The air in the studio was razor sharp. No one breathed. "Since you like to judge others so much, Greta, let's talk about you." He opened the folder, took out a few handwritten notes. His voice was no longer just calm. It was accusatory, almost legalistic. March 28, 2018. You publicly ridiculed a young person who survived a school massacre because he spoke out against gun misuse. August 2018. You said that due to demographic change, Sweden would no longer remain the Sweden we love. He looked up. The camera panned to Thunberg's face. Stiff, pale, motionless. "Shall I continue?" The camera assistants had stopped, breathing. Even the light seemed to stand still. The woman who had pushed guests to the brink for years had herself become the defendant, and there was no way out. "That was taken out of context," Greta finally managed to bring out, her voice barely a whisper. Momoa nodded and smiled. Not a warm smile. A smile like that of a lawyer who has just received the decisive confession. Out of context? There is no context in which it is acceptable to ridicule survivors of a massacre. There is no context that justifies racist undertones. There is no context in which your polarization has helped our society. Then he leaned slightly forward, looking directly into the camera. Not just at Greta, but at millions. "What I want all viewers to understand is that we, the new generation of people with responsibility, will no longer be intimidated. Not by outrage culture, not by media bubbles, not by a morality that only shows up in the studio." The studio was electrified. Jason Momoa had accomplished the seemingly impossible. He had not only taken over the conversation, he had taken over the show. Greta Thunberg, once the all-powerful figure of activism, was pale, shaky, and speechless. Her hand trembled as she reached for the glass. The camera zoomed in mercilessly. "Do you want to know what really qualifies me to take responsibility?" Momoa asked quietly. "Not just my experience, but that I have never forgotten where I come from. Never forgotten what it's like not to be able to pay bills. Never forgotten what it feels like to be underestimated." Then the final sentence, a dagger that hit in all directions. "I went into the public eye to help people, whether they resemble me or not. You went into the public eye to attack people, especially if they don't look or think like you. And that's exactly why I will win and you will lose." Silence. 10 seconds, an eternity on television. Thunberg sat there, her mouth slightly open. No answer, no plan, just shock. We'll be right back," she stammered. Cut to commercial. After the cut, the aftershocks in the control room, chaos. Producers ran around hectically. Phone calls with station chiefs in the offices, panic. Greta Thunberg sat like a statue during the commercial break. Momoa, on the other hand, was calm, controlled, and didn't even wipe his brow. The makeup artist later reported that Greta had to be completely remade up. Her forehead was shiny, her makeup had run. With Jason, there was no difference, as if it had been a perfectly normal evening. When they came back from the commercial, Thunberg tried to compose herself. A few half-hearted questions. Momoa answered calmly, politely, and with deadly precision. The audience felt that the battle had long been over. "Thank you for being here, Mr. Momoa," Greta said at the end, her voice fragile. "I thank you, Greta. It was entertaining. Maybe we'll do this again someday." The storm afterwards. As soon as the show was over, the internet exploded. Within 30 minutes, the hashtag #PushJasonMomoa was trending worldwide. It was followed by #Thunberg dismantled and #NewlyDarnership culture. A viral video titled "Jason Momoa dismantles Greta Thunberg in 120 seconds" reached 600,000 views within an hour. The next morning, it had 17 million. Activists, politicians, celebrities, everyone was posting. And for the first time, even many of Momoa's critics openly said, "I don't share his opinions, but this performance, respect." The first viral tweet came less than 10 minutes after the broadcast. A simple video, "Jason Momoa destroys Thunberg," without a single swear word. In 2 hours, it had 200,000 likes. Within a day, over 15 million views on X, formerly Twitter, alone. What surprised everyone, however, was the reaction from unexpected corners. Conservative commentators, otherwise allied with Greta, paid their respects to Momoa. Even someone like Julian Reichelt wrote, "Politically miles apart, but rhetorically, Momoa was on a Champions League level tonight. Thunberg ran blindly into a rhetorical guillotine." The reactions of his supporters were divided. Some accused him of betrayal, while others simply recognized his rhetorical talent. In the editorial rooms of ZDF and ARD, however, chaos erupted. For years, they had built up Greta Thunberg's brand as a moral figurehead, as an untouchable icon of the young movement. Now she had fallen in her own arena against an actor. Emergency meetings were called. Rumors circulated that her talk show format would be radically changed or even canceled. Greta herself tried to manage the damage on Twitter. A passionate conversation with Jason Momoa tonight. It's good that we could openly discuss important topics. But the tweet looked like an accident report after an avalanche. The replies were devastating. That wasn't a conversation, that was a demolition. If that was passionate, the Titanic was a warm bath. Meanwhile, from politics came completely different tones. The president of the Bundestag published a statement. What Jason Momoa showed tonight was not political calculation, but democratic dignity. Clear arguments, a calm tone, an unshakable stance. That's what we need today. But the strongest echo came from the people themselves. Donation platforms reported record values. In less than 48 hours, Momoa had collected more support than in the 6 months before. People who had never donated before transferred small amounts, often with the note, "For dignity and clarity, for people who don't need a stage to show their stance." Even among conservative citizens, sympathy for Momoa rose. In focus groups, many said, "I don't agree with him, but he has a spine and I miss that." Long-term consequences. Television editorial teams reported that suddenly significantly more SPD and Green politicians were willing to go on critical talk shows. Momoa had shown that you can hold your own, you can even win without bending. Journalism schools analyzed the interview in seminars. How could a format that relied on provocation implode so spectacularly? Media ethicists warned that Thunberg's style had always been more a stage performance than information. Momoa had exposed this lesson. A new generation, the debate about representation in media and politics was particularly fierce. For years, people had thought that if you weren't loud, if you didn't act populistically, you had no chance. Jason Momoa proved the opposite. He was calm, factual, down-to-earth, and yet hard-hitting. He was invited to conferences, forums, and even as a keynote speaker at international events on democratic culture. Universities asked him for guest lectures on how to debate with decency and rhetoric in times of polarization. Even law faculties began to use his appearance as a case study on how to negotiate, attack, and defend without losing your stance. International echo. The BBC reported, "An actor beats an activist, not with aggression, but with poise." Le Monde wrote, "Momoa represents a new European leader, quiet, factual, uncorruptible." And Der Spiegel headlined, From the C's to the spokesman, how Jason Momoa changed the discourse. Final word, what was planned as a media duel became a turning point. The era of morally superior monologues was over. Jason Momoa had shown, you can win not despite, but because of your composure. A week after the broadcast, he wrote on X, many have asked if I was nervous. No, I was prepared, and that's the difference. And everyone who had seen it knew it wasn't an interview. It was a turning point, and the world will not forget it. An even more shocking story is coming in the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.